So in this segment, we're going to be talking about pressure to rejoin the EU will only grow if Brexit is not seen to deliver. So this is an article in the Telegraph where they talk about the fact that Brexit has to deliver something, otherwise the message to rejoin the EU, or at least try to get better relations with the EU. Obviously, we can't join the single market, etc. Already been through that. I've covered it so many times now. It's boring. But point is, unless we see some Brexit benefits, the call to rejoin or at least get better kind of trading relationships with the EU will only grow stronger. This article, it's at least an acknowledgement of the damage Brexit has done, but the author makes some nonsensical arguments, which we'll be discussing, stuff around compromise. It doesn't make any sense and is another example of what the EU would call the UK negotiating with itself. So the author goes, we need to talk about Brexit. You might wish we didn't have to. I talk about it almost daily, so I have no issue with talking about it. Brexit started life with high hopes, but has turned into a surly 6-year-old screaming abuse at anyone who asks when is it going to live up to its early promise. Is not when our 6-year-old screaming about something living up to its early promise. I think people do that like football fans when young players don't turn out how they wanted them to turn out. Is not helped that not helped by many Remainers who would just prefer to say we told you so rather than help make it work. But why should we? They might not. They might well argue. The answer is because it's in the country's best interest to do so. That also means Brexiteers have to be prepared to come to a halfway whenever a suggestion is made about how we might forge a better relationship with Europe. And the thing is, the Remainers, we don't owe you anything, pal. We genuinely don't owe you anything on this topic. We can just keep saying we told you so because we did. But the thing is, he's right, we do need a better relationship with the EU, but every time we offer solutions, you guys don't listen. Brexit started with the idea that we could have our cake and eat it too. So yeah, it's a really high bar when you set it at that, level. Also, Remainers can say we told you so because this guy got this so wrong. Like, Brexit is beyond just us leaving the EU. You guys poisoned the well, gave us politicians like Truss and Johnson who have no idea what they're doing. Our growth rates are the worst in the G7. They poisoned the well, unleashed a lot of latent xenophobia within the UK. Brexiteers still have not accepted that, and Brexiteers still have not been pragmatic at all. But the issue is, where do you draw the line at a compromise, and would the EU even accept it? Because this is still London negotiating with London once again. Last weekend, it was reported that ministers were mulling over a Swiss-style trade deal with the EU, whereupon the air was thick with cries of treachery. This forest here is chock full of treachery, as one of my favourite wardens would say. Even people who had previously considered the Swiss relationship to be one that UK might emulate were apoplectic, Big Nigel. Nigel, for instance, gave an interview to Swiss TV in 2020 in which he said Switzerland have managed to maintain sovereignty and independence and reach bilateral agreements with the EU. You managed to do it without being part of the EU, so did Norway. Now the former UKIP leader says this is a betrayal that will be never forgiven if the UK seeks to make the UK more closely aligned to the EU. So if a Swiss-style deal isn't good enough for Brexiteers, then where is the compromise? I get what the author is saying, but if the EU allowed us a Swiss-style deal, Brexiteers don't want that because they don't accept reality. That's even if the EU offered us such a deal, which is not available to us anyway. Before I'm attacked by the Groundhog Day squad. But point being is, like, we the UK are saying we want free movement of goods, services, and capital, but not movement. The EU are never going to accept that because that's what the four pillars are based on. Ridiculous. Brexit has become an article of faith that brooks no apostasy whenever the damage that may be inflicted on the country by rigid adherence. The issue is he's right, but how do you define what Brexit is? And the Brexiteer admitting to the fact that Brexit has done damage is wild. Then again, some of them admit it wasn't about trade, so what was it about then? A better relationship is required because what we have at the moment is a mess. But again, how do you define a better relationship? Because the EU has layers and we're a third country. So unless we join EFTA or get full EU membership, there's no real in between. Like, we can get a veterinary agreement that will help a lot, but it won't be enough to make a huge impact in a sense. We can also get a trade deal that kind of encompasses some services, but it won't be as good as what we had. That's the issue. And it may not make that big of a dent. We've lost so much from Brexit already. Frustrated Brexiteers have been reduced to arguing that the reason the economy is doing so badly, the worst performing amongst the wealthiest nations according to the OECD, has everything to do with the pandemic, lockdowns and the war in Ukraine, and nothing what to do with leaving the EU. Their problem is that fewer and fewer are believing this anymore, not least because it isn't true. Brexit has a deleterious impact because we have seen all the downsides and none of the potential benefits. Brexit becoming a millstone around the Conservative Party's neck unless it can show some tangible benefits. And if it's the case that the lockdowns have hurt us more than other countries, is it because we're run by a bunch of morons? That's the only argument there, because every other country, for the most part, I think apart from Sweden, had some form of lockdown or other. Every other, European countries are far more exposed to the war in Ukraine, Russia's war in Ukraine, and yet they're doing better than us. It doesn't make sense, especially Germany. Like the fact that the German economy has grown by 0.02% since Q4 of 2019 is wild, and our economy has shrunk. It's also wild because it's like Germany are way more exposed than we are. You can't keep blaming global factors. It doesn't make sense. He also, the author used a lot of straw man arguments against Remainers, arguing we'd join the euro, etc. A Brexiteer who sees through the lie about global factors, yeah, the line is wearing thin. I'm amazed that the author has pointed this out. We have not seen all the downsides. If we got no deal, that would have been the worst downside. Also, with the potential benefits, like what? More deregulation will mean it's harder to trade with Europe. These people are still trying to have it both ways. More trade with the EU with less barriers, but also lower standards than the EU baseline. These people still don't get it. Margie was looking, Barnier was looking for a level playing field. Brexiteers still don't understand what a level playing field is. That's why we have so many wonky football pitches in the UK, apparently. In the past, we talked of a two-speed Europe ending at the same destination, with the UK lagging behind. The destination was unacceptable. What we need is a binary Europe with an inner core and an outer orbital zone of non-members, which the UK and EFTA countries could join. I mean, this is bizarre. It's funny because this speed system exists. You have EU members, EFTA countries, and then third countries. Does he want a new group with EFTA and the UK? Like, to what end? EFTA members, for the most part, have access to the EU. The Swiss one is a bit weird, but the UK does not. So what would be the point of this new group? We just ruined it for everyone else in the group, like we've ruined it for ourselves. I think that's what the Norwegian, I think that's one of the leaders of Norway said, didn't they? Like, they wouldn't let us into EFTA because we'd ruin it for them, just like we've ruined it for ourselves, or something on those lines. It's pretty scathing what she said at the time. Really scathing. Since Europe is also going into recession and the UK remains such an important market for European goods, the time may be ripe for a new relationship. Not Swiss, not Norwegian, but a bespoke version. Jesus, Evelyn Christ. God. The UK recession is predicted to last a year longer than the Eurozone. 1 whole year. The UK is an important market for the EU, but the EU has not fully lost the UK for exports. Our checks are way less stringent than the EU ones, and the UK can't really replace the lost EU trade. We import a lot of food. We can't suddenly buy it from elsewhere, so we have to buy it from the EU. The UK is the third country with a struggling economy. If I were the EU, I would look at creating a lot more trade deals with other third countries, and ironically, they're actually doing that. They're talking about a trade deal with New Zealand. I think they might have got that signed fairly recently. But the idea that because Europe's the EU are going into recession, or the Eurozone, now it's a great time to kind of exploit that situation. We're in a much worse situation than they are. I'll be honest. Can we get back to what we wanted, which is a friendly, mutual, beneficial trading arrangement and our nearest neighbours and the biggest market? I mean, didn't we compare them to the USSR and talk about how they're unelected bureaucrats? Like, we were never friendly or, any of these things. It is an ambition that any government should pursue in the national interest without being denounced as traitors for doing so. The irony is Brexiteers love doing that. The author does not explain how Brexiteers or Remainers should compromise. This is really annoying. But if we don't want to get a Swiss-style deal, but we want an easier trade relationship, how do we achieve that? Maybe through equivalency agreements, which would help. But again, we'd still face similar problems as we do now. There's no available silver bullet here, and Brexiteers don't want to compromise. And without compromising with ourselves, how do we have any hope of compromising with the EU, even if that was an available option? As they say in Brussels, London is negotiating with themselves. And the fact is, this author keeps talking about compromise needed from Brexiteers and Remainers. I thought the compromise was meant to be some sort of EFTA-style deal. Before we left the EU, I thought that was the whole point of Swiss or Norwegian or something, something similar to that. And yet, the Brexit you guys gave us was a complete third country shutout. That's what happened to us. So the idea that we should now compromise with Brexiteers is like, no. It's like, you guys need to figure out what you actually want and what is acceptable, because you've ruled out a Swiss option. You've ruled out, if these were even available to us from the EU, for example, you've ruled out Swiss, you've ruled out Norwegian. What kind of Brexit do you actually want? Because you want all the benefits of the trade without any of the quote downsides of adhering to EU rules, or having to listen to the European Court of Justice, or having freedom of movement, for example. You want all the good stuff, but none of the quote bad stuff. I despair at these people, I really do, because they still don't get it. They still think we're big boss. Like, we're not even old snake at this point. But anyways, I'll leave it there. Let me know what you think in the comments below. Like, comment, share, subscribe. Support the channel on Patreon if you can, and hopefully I'll see you in the next one.